to know that what we're trying to do is in every discussion that we have, be more reflective about what it brings up for us. What are the questions that we have, and what are the deeper kind of conversations that we should explore as a council? We're talking about various issues. And so with that, Monica and Tala, I'm going to hand it over into your very, very capable hands.
Great. Thank you so much, Lori. It's a pleasure to be here. And I too wanted to start by reflecting on how Tala and I ended up in this space. Last year, Marnie had done a presentation on self-care. And in that, I remember, Marnie, you talked about reflective leadership for the council. And that's kind of, I think, where we all started with this journey and the idea of going more deeply into some of these topics. And so Helen and I had the privilege of facilitating 3 sessions last spring where we had an opportunity to think together about what reflective leadership can include, and we tried out some reflective activities. And thank you, Lori, and the executive team to asked us to continue with you for the rest of the year using a reflective practice approach. And so here we are. And in an effort to go deeper, you'll see that we're kind of changing. I think there are often meetings where you might have 3 presentations on one call, and you'll see today we'll have 1 presentation, and we've actually almost taken the one community schools presentation and stretched it out over 2 sessions. So really providing some opportunity for us to think more deeply, to give us an opportunity to process. And to do that, we offered a framework, a reflective practice framework that we're going to suggest we continue to use together. It's where we're reflecting in, we're reflecting on, and we're reflecting for. And I'll put it in the chat so one can have their own copy, but I'll also pull it up. So just to share. Here we go. So thinking about in our meetings, and we hope you'll use this in other spaces as well as you get accustomed to using it, thinking about reflecting in action, reflecting on action, and finally for action. So what do we mean when we say in action? So today we are fortunate to have Dr. Pirro with us. And while she's talking, we can start to think about our questions. Think about our processes. What am I thinking? What are you feeling right now? Oh, why did I focus on this slide more than the last few? What biases might I be bringing to this work, and why I'm focusing on certain materials versus others, or missing certain things? What comes up for me when I hear this information? After Dr. Pirawal's presentation, we'll have an opportunity to reflect on action in small breakout groups. So an opportunity to think about some of those same questions and some of your curiosities and what came up for you. And as when you do it in a group, you'll be able to think about other perspectives as well in that moment. And like I mentioned, we're breaking up the community schools discussion into two periods this time, over 2 sessions. And so really we're going to dive most deeply into the reflection for action next time, where we're going to hear from, in the October meeting, we'll hear from someone from the Monterey County Office of Education on the local piece around community schools. And at that point, we'll really focus in, we'll have a Miro board up, we'll start doing some action planning and thinking about possible steps for your agency and for the Children's Council of what are some next steps that you all might be able to do to support this initiative of community councils, of community schools, sorry. So that's just a little kind of background of what our hope is, of how we will be going through the session, not only today, but really for the next several for this year. Any thoughts or questions about the reflective process before I turn it back to Lori to invite Dr. Pirwell? Tala, Francine, anybody else want to add anything before we?
Well, I know I see a few new faces here, so we wanted to be sure to share the framework again with folks. And it sounded as if from the evaluation last time that people really appreciated not just going through and hearing a presentation and then moving on, but us having really more of an opportunity to say, okay, what can I do with this information? How has it impacted me on a personal level? And what do I need to stop and think about a little bit more about? So hopefully it'll support our ability to really integrate the presentations into something that we can take next steps and action on after we've had a chance to reflect on it a little bit more internally and as a group. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the presentation and moving in this way.
Great. Thank you, Francine. And just you don't all have to have the framework up. I'd rather we're able to fully attend to the presentation. So I will put the questions in the chat just for things to be thinking about as you're hearing. You can jot them on the side. I use those virtual sticky notes, or paper and pen still works if that's still something you have handy near your desk, whatever appeals to you to jot down and be present during as we think with Dr. Pirouette. So, Lori.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. That was a great grounding, and thanks, Francine, for those initial comments. And so we're, really very appreciative. Dr. Janine Gus helped facilitate getting our speaker for today. And it's Dr. Navdeep Pirouette, who's from Alameda County Office of Education, to really have a discussion with us about community schools. That's a big step forward in terms of initiatives. It's going to be a big thing coming forward. We had a lot of interest as a council about what do community schools mean for us? What are the potentials? What are they? What are the opportunities? What are some of the things that we need to think about? And so I'm really glad that Alameda County Office of Education is able to be here today to share with us a conversation about that. And then we'll go into some reflection after this conversation. So Dr. Pirouette, thank you for being here. And so I turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lori. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for inviting me into your space. And I also want to thank you for all of the work that you all do at the Children's Council in Monterey to support children in their journey through education, through life, and just really thinking about the whole child. So I'm pleased to be here and to provide just a bit of background on community schools, as well as kind of the journey ahead and what the Alameda County Office of Education, along with its partners, we're planning for this journey as well. So I'll be sharing my screen. And we'll go ahead and begin. So really, this is thinking about the California Community Schools Partnership Program, often referenced as the CCSPP program, and really thinking about it as a whole child school improvement strategy. So let me go ahead. All right, so the agenda today, I'll provide an overview. We'll go over the California Community Schools Framework. We'll talk about the implementation plan that the State Transformative Assistance Center has geared up, which is the Alameda County Office of Education and Partners, as well as thinking about the transformative assistance. I'll be sharing about the transformative assistance that we've been planning as the lead technical assistance center, and also a time for question and answer and reflection, which I think Monica did a great job of kind of setting up, of thinking about what you're feeling, hearing, seeing, thinking as you are, taking in this presentation. So first, I wanted to do a quick connecting activity. Using the chat, please share what the word community means to you. So in the chat, let's just take a few minutes, and I'd greatly appreciate it if you could just share what the word community means to you when you hear it. I see love, support, unity, togetherness, supporting each other. Community means everyone, connection, participation, sharing, many perspectives, pulling together for the greater good, diverse connections, people who share space and/or purpose, belonging and acceptance with others, being brought into a group, belonging, collection of people who want to be there, inclusion, unified, support, inclusivity. Wonderful. Well, I thank you. And those are all right answers. And so I appreciate you taking the time. I just wanted to set the framing. So when we're talking about community schools, we really are focusing on the word community here. And all of your responses really lift the vision around community schooling, inclusive rather than exclusive, a sense of belonging for everyone in the community. Support, I saw a lot of that word come up. So we're definitely on the right track in thinking about what this community schools program is intended for. So now I'll move on to provide an overview. And this is really from the state's perspective of what community schools should be. So community school, and I'm not going to read it verbatim, so you can all take a look, and hopefully you have the slide deck as well, is really a whole child school improvement strategy. And when we're thinking about the whole child, we are thinking about all of the needs of academic, social, emotional, behavioral, mental health, wellness, even things in terms of nutrition. I'm sure all of you have heard of all of the state investments to support the whole child, thinking about transportation funding, school nutrition and meals for all, thinking about the mental health, school behavioral health incentive program that's coming out, as well as the mental health school site, all of these grants and funding that are coming to support students. The second bullet point, really thinking about aligning those community resources to improve student outcomes. And I know councils such as yourselves really do very much that thing, right? How are the First Fives? How are the resource and referral agencies? How are the Head Starts? How are we taking all of this funding and these wonderful programs, and how are we really using them and aligning them to other community resources that we have to really support students and children? The third bullet really being about community schools operating year round, morning to evening. We know that the needs of our communities and students do not last just from the hours of 8 to 3 p.m. We really need to be ensured that we are built up and have the capacity to provide this year round, morning to evening sort of service. And, I actually taught in East Oakland for several years. And I remember hearing from students that, their last meal was lunch on Friday until breakfast on Monday morning. And so life goes on and outside of school, and sometimes students don't have access. So how are we ensuring morning to evening, year round, during summer school, during intersession, that our students and families have what they need to be successful? The last bullet point really focusing on mitigating the academic and social impacts of emergencies has, of course, the pandemic. So really this funding and this implementation of this plan is coming from the pandemic. The funding is because of the state of emergency that we had, and to help us improve our responsiveness to what student and families' needs are during those type of emergencies. And also thinking about what are our resources to address barriers to learning. I'm sure all of you have heard the many ways that we've discussed learning loss. How do we accelerate learning? Thinking of that positive spin rather than focusing on the loss, but rather than the acceleration of learning. And so really community schools encompasses this type of framework where we are thinking about the whole child in these 4 bullet points, and how are we really ensuring that we're working together in a community and with our community to support students and families in those communities. The next slide. So in actually, I believe it was in January, and I'll just check just to be sure. Yes, in January, the State Board of Education actually approved a community schools framework. And this framework, it actually adds 4 commitments aimed at centering the initiative on equity, right? So a commitment to a willingness to share power, to use racially just restorative practices, to culturally relevant teaching practices, and to approaching school communities through the positive lens of assessing strengths versus focusing on the challenges. So this framework that was adopted by the State Board of Education, as I mentioned, in January, includes 4 pillars. You'll probably often hear the pillars more than the conditions of learning, the proven practices, and the cornerstone commitments. But I wanted to bring to your attention the 4 of these because they're all a part of the framework and equally important. So the 4 pillars really focusing on expanded learning time and opportunities. So thinking about, many of you have probably heard of the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program grant, which is a $3 billion investment and growing to support expanded learning time and enriched learning time after school and before school for students. Thinking about integrated student supports as a pillar. This really encompasses the behavioral, mental health, academic, social emotional aspects and how we're supporting students with all of their needs, thinking about dental, vision, providing access for all students and families in the community. Another pillar being the collaborative leadership and practices. And oftentimes folks will, when I mention this term, they'll say collaborative leadership, thinking about school leadership, thinking about site leadership. And actually, this is actually focusing on leadership coming from students, community members, families, community-based organizations, as well as district and site leaders. And the last pillar, and these are not in any particular order, really looking at active family and community engagement. How are we bringing in family and communities to engage with us to determine, for us to really think about what the needs are for a certain particular community schools. So rather than being prescriptive, us really being proactive in talking to our families and getting a sense of what those needs are in their homes, in their communities, for their children and students in their communities. Next, I'll focus on 4 key conditions of learning. Really, these conditions of learning are focused on the classroom level, thinking about what are those supportive environments and relationships that families have with teachers, with administrators, what are the relationships with students on campus, with their peers, also with their educators, bus drivers, cafeteria folks who support, our custodial staff. What does that look like on this campus? And what are the conditions of learning? As we know, yes, learning may happen most of the time in the classroom, but it also does happen in transit. It does happen during lunch. It also happens on the playground, especially when we're thinking about younger children and play-based learning. Also, what are the instructional strategies that are supportive for students? Social emotional learning. How do we ensure that folks and students are in that space to actually learn and progress academically? Thinking about healthy development and what are the learning barriers that may be occurring? What are the needs there? Next, I'll move over to the Cornerstone Commitments. I've mentioned this before, thinking about a strengths-based approach rather than a gap analysis or a needs assessment type of model. Looking at racially just and restorative school climates, culturally relevant instruction, pedagogy, conversation, relationships, and so forth. Also, shared decision-making, that kind of ties back to that pillar of collaborative leadership and practices. And then moving to the part of the framework that talks about proven practices. How do we ensure that community schools, and what is the research? And this framework was also based on other states of where community schools have been effective in supporting students and families and communities and really thriving and not just surviving. And so some of those proven practices are that asset mapping. What richness do we have in our communities to support our students and families? And of course, along with that, being able to identify what are the gaps in order to fill those gaps, right? Not just to call them out, but to say, now, how do we focus on this gap? And how do we look at this gap? And what is going to be the process and the continuous improvement we're going to engage in to ensure that it becomes an asset and no longer a gap? Community schools coordinators have been named as an essential piece of community schools running seamlessly and really holding the key conditions and the pillars and commitments of this framework. Also, advisory councils. I'm sure you all understand and know the power of such councils, being that you sit on councils yourselves, and thinking about the school setting. So site-based council, but also looking at the district level advisory council. And what I really appreciate is the Associate Superintendent Karen Lewis actually reached out to me from the Monterey County Office of Education, which is also then another extension, right? So yes, site, yes, district, but how are we also involving the county offices of education? So what is that role there? So very fortunate to say and happy that, the county offices of education are also thinking about how they play a part in supporting the community schools expansion across the state. And lastly, the proven practice of integrating and aligning with other relevant programs. I'm sure this group has heard of universal pre-kindergarten. It's probably a term and a phrase, and transitional kindergarten and the expansion that all of you are very familiar with. So how are we integrating and aligning other strategic investments that our state has made to support students and families and children? So that encompasses the framework. Next, I'll move to implementation. So what have we done as a state? So in 2021 and 2022, the California legislature actually allocated, initially it was approximately in 2021, $3 billion. In 2022, we actually just had another billion or so added for the establishment of new and expanded community schools as a critical equity program that prioritizes schools with more than 80% unduplicated pupil count. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the word unduplicated pupil count, what we refer to in schooling is students who are either low income English learners or foster youth. So that pupil unduplicated, so they're not they're not in multiple categories, but a school that has 80% of that count. So we're really thinking about access and equity for historically marginalized communities. So that's where we're starting, right? Is how can we support with this funding the enhancement and the addition of community schools for those pupils and those communities? So the state has actually released 3 different grant opportunities in 21-22 and will continue through 27-28 for program year. So for planning grants, there are up to, schools can qualify, or actually this is for districts, up to $200,000 per qualifying entity for LEAs with no community schools. So if I'm a district that, at this point we have no community schools in our area, those schools have applied for cohort 1 planning grants and were awarded. And actually in Monterey County Office of Ed, there were actually 4 planning grants awarded within the county Office of Education. So within the districts there. And so the idea with the planning grants is precisely the new, establishing new grants. And so for 2 years, the idea is that LEA or that district would start thinking about what would this look like to plan community schools at a district-wide level. We're really thinking about sustainability. We're thinking about aligning resources, and we know and understand, and so does the California Department of Ed, that oftentimes those resources are disseminated from the district level, right? So how are we ensuring that the district level leadership is aware of these planning and involved in planning? So those for cohort 1, and I'll share a little bit about why I'm saying cohort 1, the applications were released and grantees were awarded. Along the same time, there were also implementation grants that were released. And these are actually annual grants of up to $500,000 per school site. And that amount of up to $500,000 is actually based on a few factors. For example, average daily attendance, suspension and expulsion rates, and so forth, because the idea is how do we now implement community schools to really increase student outcomes and decrease things like suspension and increase graduation rates. And so those grants are for new, expanded, or continuing community schools. And now what the state has also done is provided an RFA, a request for applications, that was actually due last Friday on the 9th for regional technical assistance centers. And these grants were for county offices of education. There'll be 8 throughout the state based on geographic areas that the California Department of Ed and State Board of Education have determined. for county offices to be regional leads. So they'll be called RTACs. And so those applications were due last Friday. We'll hear at the November State Board of Ed meeting of which county offices will actually be identified as the RTACs. The third bullet point, leading to the lead or state technical assistance center. Our office, the Alameda County Office of Education, was actually in April named as the State Transformative Assistance Center for the state. So we'll be working in conjunction with the regional technical assistance centers to support all of the planning and implementation grantees throughout the state. And County Office of Education will also receive funding. This was actually just in the AB 181 trailer bill, where it talked about, and once again, as I mentioned, the involvement of county offices to support districts and schools, to bring together community-based organizations and to support community school implementation. This is our State Transformative Assistance Center. So as we were named in April as the lead agency for the state in supporting the California Department of Ed, as well as the State Board of Education with this instrumental work, this equity enhancing program. We have a team of the Alameda County Office of Education. We quickly stood up a team since April to really support this work statewide. So their team members are there. We are also working with we are partnering with UCLA, their Center for Community Schooling. UCLA has done much work in the LA area with two of the districts there in the LA County Office of Education area. We are working with Californians for Justice because we know that this is definitely relationship-centered work, and Californians for Justice is an organization. It's a youth-powered organization that really supports school sites and districts and county offices in fostering ways to involve communities and students and families in the work ahead. And of course, the National Education Association, we know this work cannot happen without teachers and administrators that are just on board with all of this. So that is our State Transformative Assistance Center that we've been working on, kind of standing up what this is going to look like and supporting the California Department of Ed. And when we first came together as 4 agencies, we meet weekly, we have conversations about how do we do this? What has happened and where do we need to go? So it was, interestingly enough, the California Department of Ed called it the Technical Assistance Center. And you thought, you know what, as we had our conversations, we thought this can't be technical, right? It can't be operational. It can't be tactical. It needs to be transformative. So we started thinking about the industry of school reform in the past. We started thinking about competitive grants, discrete programs and goals, compliance checklists, right? These cycles of funding. Unfortunately, I know this wasn't the plan, but local control and accountability plans, right? How they become compliance documents and not necessarily strategic documents. And so as we were thinking about technical aspects and accountability, we decided we wanted to be transformative. And what is the process of school transformation? So as a 4-partner agency, we said it's collaborative, right? It's cross-sector. It's folks sharing a common vision and goal and being democratic, right? And involving families and listening to families. So with that, we named ourselves, instead of the Lead Technical Assistance Center, and actually I realized we didn't really ask permission. We named ourselves the State Transformative Assistance Center. And so we thought about all of the different current reforms that are happening that I mentioned earlier, Community Schools Partnership Program being one of them, youth-based behavioral health, expanded learning, universal transitional kindergarten, multi-tiered system of supports, Golden State pathways, increasing staffing, thinking about teacher residency programs, professional learning. Those are all reform investments that are happening in silos right now. And unfortunately, I can say that we just keep reinventing those silos. And we feel as a State Transformative Assistance Center that the Community Schools Partnership Program done right can actually be and enhance this process of school transformation, which involves collaboration. All the things that you all mentioned in the chat earlier around community, using all of those pieces and those ideas and turning them into a process of social transformation and really involving and engaging our families and community members to support the children and families and communities in our areas. So that's really what we're thinking about. And how, you may wonder, how do you plan on doing that? One of the ways that we've landed on is developing a shared transformative vision for systems change. We know that we are going to have champions alongside of us, ambassadors. And what we need to do as a state transformative assistance center is really set the pace and set the vision and goal with our regional technical assistance centers, transformative assistance centers, with our grantees, with the state California Department of Ed, along with the State Board of Education. So we're thinking about what are going to be our standards, our rubrics, and our measures. We want to name those loosely. We don't want it to be accountability driven. However, we're naming it more as a vision. What do we want for our children? What do we want these schools to look like? We are also thinking about create communities of transformative practice. You may have heard in the past COPs, communities of practice. We also changed that without permission. We said, wait, what's a community of practice? A community of practice is usually job-alike folks coming together most of the time, at least in the county office of education setting, job-alikes from different county offices, LEAs, district schools coming together and networking, right? How do we do that in a transformative way? So what we've actually been doing is inviting not just job-alikes. We've been inviting student services folks, early learning folks, expanded learning folks, associate superintendents of districts, classroom teachers, parents, students, to really think about hearing from each other, right? Integrative teams rather than just job-alikes. Because we often know that then we become very narrow and focused, and we flip back to our comfort zone of being more technical and tactical. But instead, we want to broaden that. Another way is we've talked about providing targeted professional learning, and not just a sit and get, but really, how are we coaching alongside? How are we thinking about continuous improvement and, plan, do, study, act? How are we knowing that we may not get it right the first time, and that's okay, but we're continuously striving to be better. Study tours, consultations. One of the pieces that'll lead into next, meaningfully engaging the public. Our partners at UCLA are constantly bringing up this idea about storytelling, right? How are we sharing stories of what is working well and how it got to that point? How are we telling the stories of the unintended consequences that weren't thought of, the barriers? I'll share with this group, you'll probably hear, you probably know by now from my references that I'm an early learning champion. For early learning, I often share this story, and I don't mind sharing it here, the why behind that. And so being that you're the Children's Council, so I actually grew up in a small rural community in the Central Valley, close to Modesto. It's called Hillmar. Many of you know, and I know in Monterey, you have many migrant workers there as well, and grew up on a small farm. And my parents immigrated here at 50 years ago, actually in October, not speaking English. Started their family. My dad was a farm laborer, my mom a cannery worker in the summertime for canning peaches and tomatoes. And I'm one of 3 children, and I'm the third. And I would find any opportunity, especially after my little brother came along, to demonstrate ways of how I was the favorite in my family. And so one day I was about 9 years old, we're looking at old pictures, and I came across one, and my mom said, "Oh, that was from when you went to Head Start." I had no idea what Head Start was at that point. And I was like, "Oh," and my mom said, "Yeah, you went to school a year earlier before kindergarten or preschool." And I said, "Oh, wow." And so I took that time, of course, to say, yeah, see, to my siblings, they do love me more. They sent me to school a year earlier. And at that point, I think my mom took it upon herself to humble me a bit. And she said, actually, we would have sent your parents at the time. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know it's, eligible, income eligible. I had no idea. It was for those that, can't make it, don't make it, can't send children to private, preschools and so forth. And she said, we just didn't know about it because of the language barrier. We didn't know about it because of transportation issues. We didn't know about it because of so many reasons. We didn't have the time. We didn't have access. And so that story, specifically for this group, is unfortunately, there are probably many folks who experienced that very thing where, you know, at the time they had this resource, this space and couldn't. And we know it's still happening today, right? So how are we telling these stories? How are we engaging our public to listen to what their needs are so that these schools can be that place where families have access, where we're enhancing equity and inclusivity rather than exclusivity? So that's our goal and our hope. And this next slide just really talks about how we're doing that and how we're coming into play already. We have hosted grantee webinars for those cohort 1 planning and implementation grantees. I actually looked at the data just in preparation for this meeting, and Monterey County Office of Education, as I mentioned, was awarded 4 planning grants within the county, as well as 1 implementation grant. So one of your school sites there applied for cohort 1. So we're holding grantee webinars to really talk about this vision and provide supports. We're holding a collective learning space for grantees every Tuesday from 2 to 3:30 as a state transformative assistance center, just to be there on this journey, these initial phases. How are we even talking about this? How are we involving communities in these steering committees and advisory councils? How are we bringing students into this space? What can we leverage now? Do we have youth advisory boards? Do we have youth participatory action research already happening? What do we have already in terms of data around California Healthy Kids surveys? So we're helping to support there. We also have a transformative assistance call center, as well as an email. And we are hosting a monthly community of transformative practice specifically for county offices of education, because we know there are grants available for the districts as well as the school sites, but how are we bringing along our county offices of education, as we know who partner with many community-based organizations, who hold many resources and align things like universal pre-kindergarten, things like expanded learning opportunities program, as well as school-based health incentive programs. So those are some ways that we are bringing on our county offices of education along with us in this journey. And that is what we've planned so far. It's been since April. It's been a very busy summer, and we're just getting busier. So with that, I just wanted to open it up to any questions and answers. Also, as Monica had mentioned earlier, and maybe hopefully you've been reflecting on some ways that you can support the planning and implementation of community schools, not necessarily opening up that space currently right now, because I know the next meeting is going to be about this. But please, I'm here for any questions that you may have, and I will stop sharing so that I can see everybody's faces. And I'm not sure if I may have missed some questions already that were in the chat.
Well, first of all, just thank you so much. I will tell you that my mind is swirling right now, mostly with what I don't know. And trying to really temper myself not to move too far ahead with implementation efforts that we are going to be doing on the ground. As you mentioned that Monterey County Office of Education has already been a recipient for some of these grants, but thank you so much. I don't know if anybody has questions right now. But this is the time before I turn it back over to Monica. I see a hand, Monica Lal.
Darn it. Sorry, the other Indian Monica on the call. We'll figure out how to distinguish, but and I'm sorry for my ignorance. Are there any community schools in existence in Monterey County, or is this the initial conversation about it?
So there actually may be some community schools, and that's a great question, already in the county. However, these are the ones that have been awarded. So there are actually community schools in Oakland and Hayward and LA across the nation. But how we are looking at it now, the reason why I don't have an answer for that question has been asked before is because we never had a systematized way, because there's never been funding. And we know sometimes with accountability and funding, you are able to have certain data. So in terms of the state, actually, this is the first kind of funding stream that has come out for community schools in which we can actually now track and monitor in a positive way, not negative, of course, building capacity and implementation. But yes, there are community schools in the state, across the nation. New York, New Mexico, Baltimore, actually states that have robust community schools already in place. I'm not sure specifically in Monterey at this time.
Yeah.
Nancy, can I add to that just a little bit?
Please.
So here in Monterey County, we have many schools that have aspects of the community school model in place. And we do have a school called the Salinas Community School that has aspects of the community school framework in place. But even though it's called Salinas Community School, that has been its name for a long, long time prior to this funding source coming available. So at our current Salinas Community School, where we have that implementation grant, we will be adding a community school coordinator whose role it will be is to take that school from having just aspects of the community school model in place to full-blown implementation of all aspects of that model.
And I'll also add there, we should also not be mistaken with, and I've heard this before, and we have the same in our Alameda County Office of Education, where we have our student programs and services division that has court and community schools. And so our community schools here are, for example, our teen parent and pregnant, parenting program has been called a community school, right? And so that is not, and as Deneen mentioned, there are aspects in some schools, but it shouldn't be kind of synonymous to other community schools that focus on specific populations and so forth.
Thank you. And I see some hands up here. I see Francine and then Supervisor Root Askew.
Thank you. I had a question around how I love the terminology of transformative instead of technical assistance, how that will be focused on supporting the community engagement and moving it from engagement to power. And so I'm wondering what kind of work and how that's happening in that regard. And then the other question I had was whether or not the planning grants and then the implementation grants can actually be used to pay for services, or if they're really paying for the infrastructure around the setting up of the community schools instead of the direct services.
Those are great questions. Thank you. In terms of your first question around how are we really thinking about transforming community involvement, parent engagement, all of those pieces, we're really anchoring it to that collaborative leadership aspect. And that's how we're transforming. We're also thinking about how are we making participating in these engagement sessions equitable? How are we increasing it? How are we thinking about translation? How are we thinking about childcare needs? How are we thinking about bringing these folks in? And also I think the highest leverage piece that we're really thinking about in terms of transformation is bringing along family and community members to sit on these councils, these advisory councils, because we feel like that is where transformation comes in. Not only fill out this survey, provide us some input 3 times a year, but no, it's that continuous involvement by having those same people sit on advisory councils, have a seat at the table, continue to be that person tapping on us and saying, nope, we're still not equitable. Nope, we're still not there. I still know of a family who isn't here because of language barriers. Nope, the flyer you sent out last week wasn't accessible for all of us. So it's really bringing those people onto that collaborative leadership space and not just saying, give us everything, we'll take it and then turn it around and do something with it. It's bringing them on along the way, right? So not just the soliciting, but also then involving in the iterations of, this continuous improvement. Is it working? Is it not? how do you think we can better do this? You know, there's actually looking at helping families look at data with us, making it digestible, but what are themes? What are buckets? What is the why? Oftentimes, you know, we don't know the whys. There was a story that one of our partners shares where, I forgot what state it was, the state or city it was in, but, you know, they were getting, in the winter times, like kids, the absentee rate was just through the roof, right? So students weren't coming to school, the why, it was winter time. And through parent engagement sessions, parents were saying, oh, I'm not having my children, there was no street lights. I'm not having my children walk to school in the dark.
Yep.
Right. And it wasn't until parents were engaged to even ask the simple question of, why are your children not coming? It was a safety thing, right? So, and then how do you bring those same parents, right? And name how important that is, building them up and having them have a seat at the table. So it's really that belonging thing. It's that community. And I saw it in the chat so many times, belonging, inclusivity. How do we not just have it hey, tell us what we need to do. We know it's important, but no, come do it with us. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's really important, that engagement piece, which we always struggle with, right? About how is the best way to do it. So I can do one more question. I think Supervisor Root asked you. You're up, and then we're going to have to get into our engagement sessions.
Excellent. I just thank you for the information, and it sounds really exciting. I'm coming from some of the county board now, so we've got the county and social service side of things, but previously a school board member, and I guess, and that's maybe a conversation for another time, but I would be really interested in understanding like what our local districts are thinking about doing with these funds and the directions that they're thinking about going in. And as much as I get excited about the opportunity to involve our parents in sort of driving the directions that we're moving in, I think that there is a lot of data that we have here locally, and there are unique circumstances in Monterey County. You know, we have some of the highest rates of student homelessness anywhere on the Central Coast. And so we can talk all day long about what we're going to do in a classroom, but if students don't have their basic needs being met, we're always going to be playing catch up. And so the way in which social services and county health and behavioral health are all positioned to wrap around our schools, I think is something I'd just love to be able to talk more about at some point in the future. So just want to say thank you for the presentation, and we can take all the resources that we can get for our kids and our families. And also, you know, I think that there is so much more work that's going to be necessary for kids to be able to thrive, truly thrive.
Yes, thank you for that. And what I love is that community schools is exactly just that. It's not about just what's happening in the classroom. The idea is medical, dental, homelessness, right? Like the idea of this implementation, this plan is to actually understand why students aren't coming to school, right? And it could be because of homelessness, but it really takes away from what's happening in the classroom. And what I love about this program and why I'm doubling down on this with the state is because of this very thing. Nowhere, and I hope you all caught this, nowhere did I mention ELA, math, science, or any of that. This is about the whole child. This is about the whole community. And it is about working with our community to find those students that are homeless, to find and to help support them. And it actually, the premise around this and the framework actually doesn't name content either. It's really about how do we help make our students whole and our children whole before we provide them with the academic aspect. And back to Francine's, the only other piece I would love to get in, the planning and implementation grants were actually cohort 1. There are going to be cohort 2 grants as well coming out. We're anticipating planning grants to be released from the California Department of Ed in November, and implementation, so second round of these grants, implementation grants in January, and there'll be a few more cycles of those. So we're hoping with that, there'll be expansion, there'll be more schools on, there'll be more districts on. And in terms of allowable and non-allowable expenses, that's really CDEs. We call it them being the technical folks. So they deal with the technical assistance on allowable, non-allowable expenses. And we discussed more of the transformative.
Thank you so much. And so I think I just want to note that Alma said that, you know, she can help us with some of the timeline discussions, but I want to move to our reflective groups at this point. So Monica, want to turn it back over to you.
Actually, I'll turn it over